Okay, our next speaker is Markus Möbius from our lab, and he will talk about the effects of news aggregators and social media on online consumption.
All right, so thank you. So this project is joined also with Susan Athey, so you're kind of getting a double feature. What we are trying to do is, what we are trying to understand in this project is recent changes. With recent, I mean during the past 5 years, roughly, in the way we consume online news. And it used to be the case that we consumed news pretty much the same way as we consumed paper newspapers. We went to the New York Times website, and then we looked through their New York Times website. There's a similar setup as the paper edition. The front page is pretty similar to the page one. And then there are the various sections. But now, increasingly, we use intermediaries to actually access this news. In particular, news aggregators such as Google News, and in recent couple of years, social media such as Facebook, so that our friends basically filter the news for us. And to give you some numbers, this is from a recent survey from Pew Research. The top 25 news sites in the US receive about 30% of their traffic from Google News. Okay, so almost every third user is referred to from Google News. That's an enormous number. Facebook is increasingly becoming important. There's a sort of strong upward trend. And Huffington Post, for example, gets about 8% of its users from Facebook referred, and New York Times is 6% already too. Okay, and that has been increasing since last year, in the last few years. Now, there are different opinions on sort of what this means for the newspaper industry. Okay, and on the one extreme, you have people like Rupert Murdoch who hate news aggregators, and over the years he has called them. So I had to remember those choice words. He called them parasites, vampires, content kleptomaniacs, and tech worms of the internet intestines. So. Certainly sort of a rich set of words there. And on the other hand, you have people like equally outspoken people like Arianna Huffington who defend the business model of news aggregators. Okay, so what are these two positions? Well, the people who support news aggregators and say that, well, they send traffic, more traffic to online news sites. So basically the volume of news goes up. Now, on the other hand, people like Murdoch would say that, well, but users can skim the headlines on Google News, say they don't have to actually go to the website. So it's not clear that volume actually goes up. So this is a sort of empirical question, does volume go up or not? The other one is, it's often said that these new medias, these new intermediaries, they basically give new readers. Because you find out about a new newspaper or magazine which you didn't know about before. Okay, but the worry then is that maybe these readers, maybe you get some new readers, but the older readers maybe become more fickle because they are less loyal to your publication and they are more easily switched. And also like there's a sort of concern that newspapers lose their curator role in sort of it used to be that the New York Times provided you with sort of a set of articles they considered important, and now Google News tells you go to page 3 of the New York Times. You don't even know that this was how the New York Times ranked those different articles. Okay. Now, to get at these questions, we use an experiment, a quasi-experiment. We use the fact that in November 2009, in Google News France introduced a feature which allowed for news aggregation of local news. Okay. So up to that time, Google News France was mainly useful for news aggregation of national news. But after November, you could input your zip code into a field. It's shown below here. And once you inputted that zip code, it customized your local news for your town or for your region. Okay? And so what we can do is we can compare the people who signed up for this service, so who suddenly have local news aggregation, and we call them the treatment users. And we compare them with a set of control users who do not sign up. Okay? And we sort of carefully constructed these control users to select users who live geographically close to the treatment users, who who use Google News to a similar extent, and also consume a similar amount of local news. Okay? And this was all done with people who use Bing Toolbar, which is sort of a nice data set. Lots of social science research is done, Microsoft using that kind of data. And basically sort of we constructed a set of a few thousand users, some who signed up and some who don't sign up. Before they sign up, the two groups look exactly the same, except that the control users basically don't have any local news aggregation, and the treatment users have. And sort of then we can compare what happens. So the first question, maybe the most important one, is volume. What happens to volume of local news? And so the 0 on that graph is the sign-up date. That's when people sign up. The red graph is always the control users, and the blue graph is the other treatment users. And you can see that there's a big spike at the moment they sign up. Their consumption of local news, this is local news consumption on the left in terms of page views. On the right, you have local news consumption in terms of dwell time, how much time they actually spend in front of the browser. And you can see that there's a big spike. But then importantly, that effect lasts. It doesn't dissipate. And in fact, we followed it over like 8 weeks, and it doesn't dissipate. It's a lasting effect that people who sign up, they consume more local news afterwards than the treatment users. Okay? So that would go against Rupert Murdoch. For non-local news consumption, we don't see an effect. So the control and the treatment users are the same, which we would kind of expect because for the non-local news, nothing really changed with Google News. However, the people who use Google News, they afterwards seem to like Google News more, so they go more often to the Google News homepage. Now, what about the new readers? We know that volume goes up, but do the readers become more fickle? Now, this is looking at the unique outlets per user. And so you see before the sign-up date, the control and treatment users have roughly the same number of newspapers they navigate to in a typical week. But afterwards, this is local newspapers only. Afterwards, you see that the treatment users have about 16% more outlets they navigate to. Okay? So certainly they find out about new news sources. Okay? But what you can do is you can actually distinguish between old news and new news. And when you do that, you'll actually find that the page views both for old news and for new news goes up. Okay? So it's not the case that they substitute away from the old news sources and they are less loyal to them. It's in fact the case that everything is consumed more. All right? So the kind of one caveat in this, where Murdoch might be right, is the fact that we found that in terms of the index page views, the number of times, the share of time you spend on the index page, that's kind of, for example, the home page of the local newspaper, that goes down. And it goes down by about 15% here, between 15 and 20% for the treatment users. So basically, the treatment users are much more likely to navigate directly to news sources. They spend less time. So basically, the curator role of newspapers indeed does decrease. Okay, so that's some evidence for that. So just to conclude, we have done this. We found evidence for this, and this is just sort of an example of what kind of data you can use available here at Microsoft to do this kind of big data analysis, which otherwise is very difficult to do. All right.
Okay, thank you, Markus. Okay, we have time for a couple of questions. Yes?
I hear you, but I guess they have to.
Does their overall news consumption just go up altogether?
Yes, it does. It actually also goes up for the, I didn't show you those, but it also goes up for the non-local news. But basically, we found that goes up because they use Google News more. So it's completely explained by the increased use of the Google News homepage. Whereas the local news goes up both conditionally and unconditionally on the Google News homepage use.
More questions? Yeah.
Often in newspapers, the kind of newspaper you read determines your political orientation. Mm-hmm. Do you see any border crossing between people that they used to read only one type of newspapers?
Yeah, so this is something we are working on right now, because so far, what we used for this project, I just showed you the data for, was basically just local, non-local classification, and that's very easy to do. When you go at political orientation, you actually have to like look. Well, you can either classify newspapers, using some other index. There's also like text-based classifiers where you can, for example, go to the opinion pages. And some work was done, for example, by Matt Gansko, and you go to the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and this text-based classifiers can sort of determine whether this is a left-leaning or more right-leaning newspaper. And so you can use these kind of approaches, and this is something we are looking at right now, especially because we want to look more at the social media aspect, and that's going to be important.
Okay, thank you, Marcus.
Thanks.